Resurrection Investigation. Tonight, we bring you the story that has shaken Jerusalem to its core. A man who once declared dead is now said to be alive. But is it true?
We'll be taking you through the key eyewitness accounts from those who saw his burial, to those who found his tomb empty, to those who claim to have seen him alive with their own eyes.
And perhaps the most shocking of all, why did his followers, once fearful and defeated, suddenly become bold enough to risk their own lives for this claim?
Our reporters are on the ground speaking with those closest to events. What really happened? Let's find out. We begin with the burial. Over to you, Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim, and this is some idiot I found on the street. But we're here in Jerusalem, where reports are spreading about an empty tomb. But before we get into that, let's establish the facts. Sir, can you have claimed to witness the burial of Jesus of Nazareth? Can you tell us what you saw?
Yeah, I was there. I saw him die, crucified by the Romans outside the city. There was no doubt he was dead. Later, I watched as Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, took his own body and placed it in his own tomb.
How do we know this really happened? Some might say that this is just a rumor or confusion.
It's no rumor. This was done in a well-known location. Joseph's tomb wasn't some hidden cave. It was a freshly cut tomb, easy to identify. Many people knew where it was, including the religious leaders, who even had the Roman guard stationed there.
So you're saying there's no way someone could have gone to the wrong tomb?
Exactly. If there had been any mistake, the authorities could have simply pointed out the correct tomb. But they didn't. Because the one everyone knew about, the one Joseph owned, it was empty.
Some might suggest Jesus wasn't really dead. That's how we survived. But what do you say about that?
That's impossible. I watched as the Roman soldiers confirmed his death. They even pierced his whole side with a spear. Blood and water flowed out. No one survives that.
So, just to be clear, you saw him die, you saw his burial, and you know exactly where the tomb is?
Yeah, there's no question about it. Jesus was dead and he was buried in that tomb. What happened next? That's what we're all trying to figure out.
Thank you for that report. We've now established that Jesus was buried in a well-known tomb guarded by Roman soldiers.
But now shocking claims are emerging. Claims that the tomb is empty. For more, we go to Alfred, who is speaking with someone who saw it firsthand.
Good evening, I'm Alfred, and I'm here with Bruce, who claims to have seen the tomb empty. Sir, can you tell us what happened in that tomb over there?
It was early in the morning on the Sabbath. Several women, Mary Magdalene and another Mary and others, they were going to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. But when they arrived, the stone was rolled away. The tomb was empty.
Empty? Are you sure this was the right tomb? Some suggest that you may have simply gone to the wrong place.
That's ridiculous. This wasn't some forgotten grave. This was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, a well-known location. The same one the religious leaders made sure that was sealed and guarded. There's no way that this could have been the wrong place.
Speaking of religious leaders, if this were a mistake, wouldn't they have just pointed out the real tomb?
Exactly. If Jesus' body was still in the tomb anyway, they would have shown it immediately to silence all of this, but they didn't. Because they couldn't. The tomb everyone knew about, the one that Jesus was buried in, was undeniably empty.
Let's go back to the women discovering the tomb. Why is that significant?
Because in our culture, a woman's testimony wasn't even considered valid in court. If someone were making up this story, they would have never chosen a woman as the first witness. But the reason that they say the woman found the tomb first is because that's exactly what happened.
Some say this is a rumor spreading through Jerusalem. How do you respond?
A rumor? This is Jerusalem. This is the very place where Jesus was crucified, buried, and some proselytes are still lying there. If the body was still there, anyone could have gone and checked for themselves, but they didn't because the tomb was empty. That's why the news is turning in the whole city upside down.
So let's be clear, you're saying the tomb was empty and there was no way to deny it?
That's right. Everyone in Jerusalem knew where Jesus had been buried. If his body was still there, the movement would have ended instantly. Instead, we're standing here asking, where is he?
A shocking development indeed. Back to you in the studio.
We first confirmed that Jesus was buried. Then we learned that his tomb was empty. Now we're hearing that people are actually seeing him alive. I don't even know how to process this.
But luckily, our next reporter is on the scene. Over to you, Alan.
Sir, you claim to have seen Jesus alive?
Yes, I know how crazy that sounds, but I saw him. He appeared to me spoke to me, I had lost all hope. And then there he was standing before me.
Are you sure this wasn't just grief playing tricks on you?
No, I know what I saw, and I'm not the only one.
So what?
Him too.
You also saw
Hey, yeah, bro,
Jesus?
speak up, speak up.
You also saw Jesus?
Yeah, not just me, all 12 of us. You know, we were hiding, terrified, and suddenly Jesus appeared. He showed his wounds, spoke to us, we even ate with him. There was no vision, no hallucination, bro, it was real.
But this was a group experience. Couldn't y'all have had some kind of shared delusion?
I mean, you ever heard of 12 disciples, 12 people hearing, hallucinating the same exact thing at the same time across multiple occasions? Nah, this is him.
So we have individuals and groups claiming to have seen Jesus alive. Not just once, but multiple times in different places. These accounts come from multiple independent sources: Luke, John, Paul, and Matthew. Either this is the most widespread case of mass delusion in history, or Jesus actually rose from the dead. Back to you in the studio.
We followed this story from the burial to the empty tomb to eyewitness accounts of Jesus alive. But there's one final and undeniable fact. Something changed in Jesus' followers. These men who ran in fear when he was arrested, yet suddenly they were willing to die, proclaiming that he had risen.
What happened? Our reporter is live with someone who was there.
Sir, you were with Jesus before his death. Tell us, what was it like for the disciples after he was crucified?
It was over. We had followed him, believed in him, and then he was dead. Not just dead, crucified. That meant that he was cursed by God. We thought we had been wrong about everything.
So what did you do?
We hid, locked the doors. We were terrified that the authorities would come for us next. Peter even denied knowing him. We had given up.
But something changed days later, and the others weren't out in public. We're out in public boldly preaching that Jesus was alive. What happened?
We saw him, and everything we thought we knew changed.
Were you convinced just like that?
We didn't want to believe it at first. It seemed impossible, but he had appeared to us, spoke to us, ate with us. We touched his wounds. It was real, and suddenly we understood. His death wasn't a curse. It was a victory.
Some say you were just making it up. That this is religious movement you created.
Then why would we die for it?
Die?
Every one of us faced persecution. Some were beaten, some were imprisoned, many of us were executed. Peter was even crucified. James was killed by the sword. We could have stopped it all by just saying it was a lie, but none of us did, because it wasn't. We've presented the evidence, the burial, the empty tomb, the eyewitnesses, the transformation of the disciples. But some might still ask, was there another explanation? Tonight, we examine the three alternative theories and why they fall under scrutiny.
We'll be using what we learned in our eyewitness reports to test these claims. Let's start with the first theory. Some skeptics argue that the disciples only thought they saw Jesus, claiming that they were experiencing hallucination or religious visions. But does this theory really hold up?
No. First, hallucinations are highly subjective and individual. They don't happen in groups of people at the same time in the same way. Yet, we just heard from multiple eyewitnesses who have claimed to see Jesus together. The 12 disciples saw him, a group of women saw him, and even 500 people at once saw him, according to Paul's writings.
That's right. There's no documented case in history of mass hallucinations where people all saw and experienced the exact same thing in different places and at different times.
Even if we accepted this explanation for the appearances, it still doesn't explain the empty tomb. You can hallucinate a person, but you cannot hallucinate an empty grave.
Bottom line, the hallucination theory collapses under its own weight.
Another claim is that the women disciples simply went to the wrong tomb, mistaking an unoccupied grave for Jesus' tomb. Could that explain the reports of the empty tomb?
Not a chance. As we established in our first interview, Jesus was buried in a known specific tomb, the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. This wasn't some unmarked grave in the middle of nowhere. It was a well-documented, well-guarded, and well-known grave.
Even Jesus' enemies, the Jewish leaders, acknowledged the tomb was empty. If the disciples had simply gone to the wrong tomb, all they had to do was produce Jesus' actual body from the correct tomb. But they didn't, because the body was gone.
This theory also doesn't explain why the disciples later claimed to have seen Jesus alive, or why they were so willing to die for their belief in the resurrection. If this was just a mix-up, then why would they risk their lives for a mistake?
The final alternative theory suggests that Jesus never actually died, that he only appeared dead, later revived in the tomb, and somehow escaped.
This theory is perhaps the most physically impossible of all. Let's consider the facts. Jesus was brutally tortured, flogged, beaten, and nailed to a cross. He was stabbed in the side, which produced a flow of blood and water, a medical sign of death. Roman soldiers were expert executioners. If he had been alive, they would have noticed. He was wrapped in burial cloths and sealed in a tomb for 3 days without food, water, or medical help.
Yet, according to this theory, Jesus somehow survived all of this, unwrapped himself, rolled away a massive stone, overpowered Roman guards, and convinced his disciples that he had conquered death, all while being severely injured?
It's simply not plausible. Even if Jesus had survived, his condition would have been so weak that he simply wouldn't have inspired the belief that he had defeated death. Instead, the disciples would have seen a half-dead man in desperate need of medical attention, not a victorious, resurrected Lord.
So where does that leave us? The hallucination theory fails because people don't share identical hallucinations. The wrong tomb theory collapses because even Jesus' enemies admitted to the tomb being empty, and the swing theory is just physically impossible.
That leaves only one explanation that fits all the evidence. Jesus actually rose from the dead.
It's the only conclusion that explains why the tomb was empty, why the disciples saw him alive, and why they were willing to die rather than deny him.
And that leaves us with one final question. If the resurrection is true, what does this mean for you?